Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. In this episode, I invited writer and editor Emily Bingham to explore the evolution of how information has been distributed and consumed in the past few decades, as well as the implication of this evolution on creators, which include artists, writers, and also spiritual practitioners. Many practitioners who do at least some of their work online have had to engage with social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or Substack. And a common complaint, a common objection that I hear from colleagues is how they bump up against some sort of resistance to creating content for these online platforms. So a few months ago, I wrote a post on Instagram encouraging folks to consider supporting practitioners who create free public offerings like podcasts or Instagram posts, because most of these practitioners are doing so at their own time and no one's really paying them to create something brilliant and thought-provoking and nourishing for the ones receiving them. And Emily shared a very thoughtful comment in response to this post. So I reached out to her asking if she would be interested in recording a conversation on the podcast. And I'm really glad she said yes, because the resulting conversation is so interesting and it's quite different than other conversations we've had on the podcast. We discussed Emily's journey as a writer, as an editor, as well as the evolution of the media industry since Emily first started, and how that's impacted the mindset of the readers, as well as the economy of how compensations are structured. We also discussed the term content, which is how the industry refers to information made available on a website or other electronic medium, and what Emily thinks about that term. And finally, towards the end, Emily shared some brilliant advice for those creating work and those who want to share it online, which at this point is pretty much most people I know, to be honest. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Emily Bingham. Hello, Emily. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Jonathan. It's my pleasure.
It's so exciting to finally reconnect with you. And the genesis of this conversation feels very Jupiter and Gemini to me. I don't remember exactly what I posted, but we ended up having a conversation over Instagram on a topic that I've been wanting to talk about actually for some time, which is the shifts and evolution of information and how we consume it as people and how we interact with information. And I think this is so synchronistic that you ended up being the person, that I talk about this topic, because I know that you have a background in journalism and you're a writer. And so I feel like you have a perspective on this that's not just like in the past 5 years, like you've been tracking this for a while. So yeah, I'm just really excited to have this conversation with you. And thank you for being here.
I'm really excited to be here. I saw your post on Instagram, kind of posing some of these questions, and it just fired me up because it's something I think about all the time.
Mm.
I graduated from journalism school in 2005,
Mhm.
which was sandwiched in between the launch of Facebook in 2004 and Twitter in 2006. So
Whoa.
I feel like my career has really grown up alongside this evolution of social media and multimedia platforms. So I have a lot to say. I do want to add the caveat that I'm not like a media history expert. This is just my own opinion and what
Yeah.
I've seen through a couple decades of personal experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious to have you introduce yourself a little bit, Emily, to listeners. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about you, about what you do now and before, and your background.
Sure. Well, I am. I always feel like I have to say I'm a lot of things. It's not just what I do for a living. I'm a gardener. I'm an astrologer. I'm a
Mhm.
yogi. I am a big nature nerd and a naturalist. But for the purposes of this conversation, I am a writer and a professional writer. I've been writing for publication for 20 years, 20 plus years, really. I graduated with a degree in journalism,
Mhm.
and I have been working in news media ever since. So, magazines, national magazines, local newspapers, online media, and then as the media landscape expanded, moving into like social media, newsletters, digital media, video production, that sort of thing. So, you name the package, and I have written or produced for it.
Mm.
So I've seen a ton of changes. I've seen the industry expand and also shrink in
Yeah.
terms of resources and personnel. And I never would have guessed I'd be one of the last ones standing of my journalism class of 2005 still in the industry. Most of them
Mhm.
have left for other gigs and careers.
Yeah.
But here I am.
Yeah.
So it's something that I love, and it's also a bit of a love hate relationship at times. So yes, I'm excited to talk about all this with you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to have you maybe walk us through some of the evolutions that you've noticed and experienced in terms of how people interact with information, how people interact with media, and how that's impacted you on a professional and personal level, Emily. I know
Mm.
I just kind of threw, like five different questions in there.
It's well, and it's a lot. I mean, it's not there's because this has been something ongoing
Mhm.
for 20, 30 years. Media
Mhm.
was largely the same for so long that it's
Yeah.
it's it's hard to encapsulate, but I'll do my best. I mean, one of the biggest, I think, changes I've seen has been media and information and knowledge evolving from something that was very one way to a dialogue to two ways. And I
Mm.
don't just mean in terms of the birth of comments sections, which is its own thing entirely, or
Mhm.
social media where you have these kind of mini communities, but also the ability for those who create media products to track data in real time.
Yeah.
So, following metrics, seeing what readers and consumers are clicking on, how long they're spending on a certain page, what they go to after visiting that page, that sort of thing. Did not have that when I was first starting out in journalism in the early 2000s. The first magazine I worked at had a website that was literally just a static page with a phone number to call for subscriptions.
Right.
And within the first couple of years of my working there, they launched an actual website, added, all this content online, and then eventually there was commenting. But the ability for producers to track what readers are engaging with has definitely impacted how media is produced and what media
Mm.
is produced. I mean,
Mhm.
I hate the term clickbait, but it's called clickbait for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
if a media organization is beholden to advertisers for some of their income, they need content that generates interactions and clicks and time on page. And so you bet that people are paying attention behind the scenes to what you're spending time with and reading and engaging with so that they can create more of that kind of content and serve it up
Mm.
to you, which
Mm-hmm.
is mind blowing. It used to just be like,
Mm.
I'm going to write an article, it's going to get published in this print magazine, and hopefully somebody goes down to the corner store and buys the magazine because they like the cover and sits down and reads it. And now it's like, what words do I want in my headline that's going to be extremely enticing so that they want to
Mm-hmm.
click on it? And that's
Yeah.
different. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's for
Mm-hmm.
sure been a big change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another significant change, obviously, has been just the volume of content. Again, with like the local media example, you used to just get your local paper, or watch the local news, or maybe you had a subscription to some of your favorite magazines, or you picked them up at the newsstand. Now you can open up your phone or your tablet or your computer, and you can, I mean, the sky is the limit for what
Yeah.
kind of media you can consume. And
Right.
then we have the algorithm. So it's not just people out there surfing around seeing what's out there. It's also the algorithm saying, here's what we think that you would like,
Mm-hmm.
based on the metrics, based on who you are, based on the data we've collected about you. Um, and that's, I mean, the algorithm, probably we could have a whole podcast just based on the algorithm.
Yeah.
And what a headache that is, I think, for everybody, except for the people making the money at the platforms that are using the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I would also add the rise of the content creator and the
Mm-hmm.
influencer. So
Mm-hmm.
we've seen this shift from traditional media models, newspapers, magazine, television, radio, to we had bloggers at first, and then we had the social media platforms come along, and we have the kind of an increase of the solopreneur model, and that's also changing, I think, the narrative of what is media, where do people get their information. I think people are just as likely to engage with or follow individuals now for
Mm-hmm.
the kind of content, like opinion, news, recipes, whatever, that they used to just pick up their local paper for.
Right.
So that's kind of, I think, like the major bins that I've seen in the evolution of media over the course of my career, at least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's that's such an incredible and concise walkthrough of like this evolution, and it makes me wish that I had done a little bit more research about this, because as you're speaking, Emily, I'm thinking about how as both the on the reader side, what I'm hearing from you is on the reader side, there's more of this ability to interact now with the people who are making the media, right? And then on the side of the people who are creating it, there's more of this ability to track the demand, right? And what I think is so interesting, though, in the midst of the clickbait economy and this ability for people who create the writings to track what people want to read, there's also a decline in people's willingness to pay for it, right? And so it's
Mhm.
interesting. It's almost like what I'm hearing is there is a progression to becoming more sophisticated in terms of being able to, in the economy of creating and consuming media, there's an increased sophistication in both the supply and the demand side, but somehow the economy of the media itself is not necessarily quote unquote improved, or maybe it's just kind of dispersed. I don't know. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up supply and demand, because I think that's one of the issues
Mm,
with why readers are not just happily shelling out money at every turn for whatever it is that they're consuming, whether it's Patreon, signing up for somebody's Patreon, or
mm,
paying for a subscription for their local or statewide newspaper.
yeah.
I mean, we know supply and demand. When supply increases, demand. I mean, let me back up here and say, when we have too much of something on the market, its value typically declines. And
Mm,
so, what I think part of what we have seen is there is so much information out there, and so much of it is free online, that people, when they run into, for example, in my industry in journalism, a paywall, on an article that they want to read, they'll say, I'm just going to find that elsewhere.
Mm.
Or I'm going to go click onto the next thing and watch a cat video because I didn't
Yeah.
really, really want to read it all that badly.
Hmm.
And so I think we have a value problem just because there's so much out there. I
Mm.
do think traditional media, is sort of to blame because, like I said earlier, with the clickbait and quote unquote journalism, churning out these stories to try to get people to come visit your website, you're
Mm.
increasing the volume of not really substantive, valuable work out there.
Mm.
And it just
Mhm.
adds to the noise and the clutter and the reason why people feel like they're at this limitless buffet
Mm.
that if they don't like that thing, there's literally 2,000 more options on the menu.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also think, again, speaking from somebody who has been in more traditional media roles in journalism, there was this scramble, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, for media companies, newspapers specifically, to start putting things online when
Mm.
they had only ever been print.
Mhm.
And I tried to look this up and didn't find an answer. I don't know why they didn't try to monetize the online content at first, why they just put things online for free, but they
Mm.
did. I
Mm.
don't know if it's because they maybe thought it was so ludicrous that people would be reading online versus a paper. It was sort
Right.
of unthinkable at
Right.
the time. I remember working at a magazine in 2011, and I was helping them with a redesign, and the um, young, super smart designer who was building out the website for us told me in a conversation that someday soon half of our readers would be accessing the website on their phones. And I could not believe it. I was like, that's
Mm.
absurd. Well, now
Mhm.
it's like, what, 86% of people read all their stuff on their phones. It's just so I think that I think that a lot of traditional media people didn't really see that coming. And for whatever
Mm.
reason, whether that was it or some other reason, they just put everything up on the websites for free. And so
Mhm.
people got used to getting it for free. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, when paywalls started going up, of course, readers are going to say, well, I've been eating for free at your restaurant for 5 straight years, and now you
Right.
hand me a bill. Why would I pay? I'm just going to go next door where I can probably get a snack for free.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think that there's been multiple ways in which um, readers have where the work itself has been devalued and readers have gotten accustomed to not paying, and so they are more willing to move elsewhere. Now I do think there has been a shift. I've seen it just in maybe like the last couple of years with like more creators having communities on Patreon, for
Mhm.
example.
Mhm.
I know that you want to talk about Substack, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like where you have these avenues where people are saying, "Hey, what I do requires labor. It requires a history of like education or experience,
Yeah.
and therefore I need to get paid for my time." And for newspapers part, you see more of them adding paywalls, and more readers are starting to get the idea like, I want quality, I want journalism, I want to be in the know. So I think some people are making that shift, but
Mm.
it's kind of a little late, I think, in some instances.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so interesting, Emily, because as you're speaking, it's making me think about my experience in the music industry as well, and how, um, when I was a child, I used to go to CD stores and I used to buy music, and I used to have like a physical music collection, right? And um, try as I might as an adult, collecting vinyl, I could never have the same amount of dedication anymore because now there's Spotify, and
Mhm.
as much as I love the physical manifestation of music, I have Spotify, which really changed my consumption behavior. And it's like at some point, um, there's only so much you can do if you're trying to swim against the current. Like I remember, I remember the day that Tower Records here in New York City closed down, And I was still one of those last people who were purchasing from Amazon actual CDs.
Mm.
But regrettably, like now, I don't really listen to those CDs anymore. They're just kind of gathering dust somewhere um, in my space. And I think similarly, I do wonder because in music, you definitely see people creating Patreon, creating um, Kickstarters to support their musical projects, but it never quite recovered the same kind of yeah, earning abilities for musicians ever again, right? We haven't seen a renaissance of musicians making money, except for if you are, Taylor Swift and Charlie XCX, right? And the people who are at that level, who are probably also making money from other ways, like they're getting endorsements, they're getting their music on like big, um, yeah, like big places, right, that can still pay. So, yeah, I'm curious to hear you maybe speak more about this um, new model, right? Substack or people creating Patreons. And um, I think what I've seen, I'm speaking from the perspective of being a spiritual practitioner who sees this um, kind of coming in and out too. Like I've seen that, a lot of people started really big Patreons in like 2018, 2019. Like I still have friends who started their Patreon at that time who has like a steady number of people on their Patreon. They have like 300, 400 people supporting them. But to be really honest with you, a lot of people who started Patreon a year ago, 2 years ago, I don't see that people have quite that number of following. And, it's always really challenging because even for myself, I've entertained the idea of having like a membership community. But then if I only have 5 people in there, does that make sense? Like you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons, right? Um, of creating something that can potentially have that is an unlimited, a bin where you put content into unlimitedly. And I know you also wanted to talk about the word content, so we can do that too. But
I have
um,
feelings on the word content.
yeah, feelings on the word content. Maybe we'll start there. I'm curious to hear your take on this. Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to talk about everything you were just speaking to with
Hmm.
creator communities and how we can support artists and makers. I will just speak to the the dirty word content, and this is just truly my own opinion. But when I first started out, and still to this day, I was called a writer. I am a writer, and then at some point at my various employers, you used to be on the editorial team when you were a writer or a journalist at a publication, and then it
Hmm.
changed to the term content. You were part of the content team, and I have this whole essay that I'll probably never write about the word content. To me, it sounds like a coin being dropped into a dry well and clinking around the bottom. It's like
Hmm.
content. It's like this kind of empty clanging sound
Hmm.
to my synesthete brain, and it's devoid of warmth and
Hmm.
connection content.
Hmm.
And so when I think of people, including myself, being framed by others, framing themselves as content creators, I just see like a machine churning, and it's
Hmm.
like you're making you're making content, whereas we used to be writers and editors and photographers and videographers, and
Hmm.
there's an inherent artistry in naming yourself as such, because
Hmm.
it's like if you were to tell me I'm a professional content creator, I have no idea what that means other
Yeah.
than you are making things to put on the internet. But if you tell me I'm a musician, I'm a music writer, I'm a storyteller, whatever, it tells me so much more about who you are, what your passions are. And so I just want to call that out. Thank you for the invitation, for people to like think more about when they're using that phrase, and what it means to them, and if it's inherently changing how they feel about the work that they do or the work that they're
Hmm.
consuming.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to your question about communities to support kind of directly artists and makers and creators, I'm so glad you brought up music because I think there is a really strong parallel into what happened with the music industry and what
Mm-hmm.
happened to media publishing. And the interesting thing, I don't know if this is true, but I learned recently that most of even like the big artists don't really make all that much money overall from their album sales anymore. It's through
Mm-hmm.
everything else that they do. It's through, like you said, the
Yes.
endorsements and the tours and
Yeah.
merch and whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
I see these online platforms where you can connect with and directly financially support creators as being one piece of a multi-prong approach that I think
Mm-hmm.
more writers and creatives need to be taking. I think the people that are making a full-time support my life salary from Patreon or Substack are kind of a slim few. I
Mm-hmm.
think that these platforms can be really nice and probably better feeling ways to engage with one's audience than traditional social media
Mm-hmm.
for creators, but it probably shouldn't be the only thing that
Yeah.
one is doing. And I'll give
Mm-hmm.
an example. There's a UK based author named Emma Gannon, who I follow on Substack.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of the most successful Substack writers in the literature genre. She makes six figures, I guess, off of her Substack a year.
Mm.
But that's not even the only thing that she does. She hosts creative retreats and online Q&As, and she sells books, and she writes other things, and she's a guest speaker. And so I think that kind of in the same way that it's hard to build wealth, like sustainable wealth, just collecting a paycheck every 2 weeks. They say like
Mm-hmm.
diversify your income streams. I think it's important to diversify your creative streams, to diversify the ways that you're connecting with your communities in order to find a sustainable support system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really do love Substack. It seems kind of like the bright future for a lot of creators,
Mm.
but I don't think I think people should go into it with realistic expectations and also
Mm-hmm.
not be like, I'm going to start this community and be able to make a full-time salary off
Yeah.
of my support system. But
Yeah.
it's a great way to connect with people. I think that it's a very safe feeling because it's not algorithm driven. It's the writers
Mm.
I know that produce for Substack just love it.
Mm.
Sarah Faith Gottesdiener for the spiritual community. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with her. She's had some
Mm-hmm.
posts recently breaking down how it's worked for her.
Mm.
And I think finding other people that have been transparent about these new platforms and what it's providing for them is not only giving me hope, but also I think can kind of provide a framework for people as they're maybe considering these transitioning over to these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. You're making me think about something that I have been contemplating on quite a bit, Emily, which is the reality that I think what can be so challenging, especially if one is starting out as anything, right? As a writer, as a spiritual practitioner, as a musician, is the reality that you don't really have a set path anymore. Like the industry is dead. Like in some ways, I think maybe the industry has been dead for a while, but um, I'm starting to notice this too with a lot of my friends who are in finance or even in insurance that there's an idea, right, that like, oh, if I just do all the right things, if I just check all the boxes, I would be able to get to a certain point. And that hasn't been totally true for a while because even the people who look like they were checking all the boxes and becoming really successful because they check all the boxes usually have some secret thing
Mm.
going on for them, right? Like that's why checking all the boxes worked for them because there's something else. Like maybe they had a connection, or maybe they were known for something. And even the writers you mentioned on Substack, I feel like these people, let's take Sarah Faith Gottesdiener as an example. Like she's written a book, and like how many years of um, doing readings and making courses has been under her belt. She has and she also has a podcast, which is, I guess all I'm trying to say here is that her Substack is among one of the many things in her ecosystem. She's also run a very, very successful newsletters for years, right? Like
Yes.
her newsletter community is like, you know, she has a diehard newsletter community. And so
Hmm.
when she decided to turn that newsletter into Substack, I bet a lot of people wanted to support her, because she's
Hmm.
built up that loyal following for a while. So it's really interesting because I think what I'm trying to stumble into, Emily, is maybe this is a bit of an assumption on my part, but I feel like you and I are people who, I know a little bit about your chart. Maybe I'll edit this part out,
I
but
don't care. Chart away. Let's get a little more woo.
cool. um, I am thinking about, if I'm remembering correctly, you have Saturn in Libra, right?
I do. Mhm.
Yeah, and I have Saturn in Capricorn, and Saturn is domiciled in Capricorn, Saturn is exalted in Libra. And so I feel, something in your presence and just kind of knowing you, this desire and this willingness to kind of craft, to really refine one's craft, right? And so it can feel demoralizing for people who really like to be good at something, like really, really good at writing, really good at astrology, really good at making music, right? To then also feel like they have to create a persona, which I feel like sometimes this is one of my own personal beef with this model, right? Like with, supporters creating creators model, the creator does have to play a little bit with that idea of being a persona. I've actually never seen someone who's just like, I can't think of anyone who hasn't created like some sort of persona.
Hmm.
Maybe Moonlists. That's the only person I'm thinking
Hmm.
about. Like, there's this person on Substack creating what's called Moonlists, and it's kind of a very successful Substack, it seems like. But um, I feel like for most people who have been on that Patreon wheel or Substack wheel, people who have a bunch of people supporting their work to just basically do what they are good at and what they love to do, they're also personalities. I'm curious to hear your take on this. I'm curious to hear your perspective on, do I need to be a celebrity essentially in
Mm.
order to be able to create a successful Substack or a successful Patreon?
Mm. There's so many directions I want to go with this. I want to start by saying I would pose the question, rhetorical,
Hmm.
to your listeners or to you. I would start by saying, well, what is success to you?
Mm. Hmm.
What is
Hmm.
success? Is it being able to support yourself financially off of one newsletter?
Mm.
Tall order, but
Hmm.
some people are doing it.
Hmm.
Is it creating meaningful work that reaches people who admire, appreciate, and are inspired by it? Whether that's like three people and your mom, but you feel good about it. That
Mm.
could also be a definition of success. So
True.
I think it really starts with like what is one hoping for, and what is their definition of success. And
Mm.
then I would say, to the idea of persona and celebrity, um, this is something I wrestle with quite a bit because I feel extremely resistant to the idea of making myself a brand. And and people will tell me, "Oh, but you have such a great brand." I've been a nature and outdoors writer largely, also a little bit of health. They used to call it your beat. Well, now it's your brand.
Mm. Mm.
And people are like, "Well, this is, you've got a great brand and you should work
Mm.
more on your brand." And I'm like, "But I'm so much more." Like what I said at the very beginning of the conversation, I'm not any
Mm.
one thing. I'm also interested in nutrition and
Mhm.
kettlebells and stargazing and a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And so But especially in the current media landscape, I do feel like when people create a little bit more of a cohesive image, some readers respond to that.
Mm.
And I think that if you are posting things on algorithm driven
Mhm.
website, not websites, but platforms, the algorithm really responds well
Mm.
to that, and it wants you to niche yourself.
Yeah.
But I'm personally all for the sparkling, multifaceted human,
Mm.
and I think I think it's, for me, success is, I'd rather have 100 really dedicated readers who love
Mm.
me for me and my voice, and they are going to click
Mhm.
open on every single one of my newsletters. I don't even have a newsletter, by the way, but if I did, there, that's 100% or near open rate, then 10,000 readers and I have a 10% open rate because a lot of people just
Right.
signed up because of something that went viral or whatever. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that directly answers your question, but
Mhm.
those are my thoughts on it. I think it really starts with an internal inquiry of, like, what are your goals? What are you
Mm.
hoping to create? What do you want your workflow to be like?
Mhm.
Do you want to be a brand? Maybe you're so
Yeah.
into one thing that you do want to be that. But
Mhm.
that, at this juncture, I might change my mind, but at this point, for me, that's not exactly what I'm going for.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think that that gives me and hopefully people listening a lot of things to think about. Yeah, because I appreciate that invitation to return to a clearer definition of what success looks like, Emily, because chances are trying to fulfill some definition of success that's not really our own is not really going to make us satisfied, right? Which is like the point of being successful for a lot of people is they want to be satisfied,
Yeah.
and you don't get that satisfaction from just the numbers, right? From just, oh, my podcast has X many listeners or my Substack makes X amount of money. Like that quickly can become empty if it's not coherent and in conversation to the things that we care about, like truly, uniquely as a human being. Yeah.
Yes, and I want to add to that the idea of satisfaction, and just, I mean, I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but as a reminder
Mm.
to anybody listening, one really excellent way to decrease satisfaction is to have a high level of media consumption. And
Mm.
so I think that, like, because again, it's hard to really go inward and say, what is my personal definition of success, or what do I want from the work I'm creating, if you are ingesting so much
Mm.
other content
Mhm.
and work, and then inherently on some level comparing yourself, right? And
Yeah.
I think that we see loneliness and dissatisfaction skyrocketing right now because so many of us are just opening our phones and scrolling Instagram or TikTok
Mm.
or whatever. And I've tried to become extremely mindful about my consumption. And I know the irony is, somebody who works in media, I should be spending time in media, but I don't read a lot of news. I don't spend a lot of time
Mm.
on Instagram. I took a six
Yep.
month total hiatus from all social media. And so
Yep.
I think that's just something also to kind of mention and be aware of.
Yeah. I love that. That's such an important reminder. Hmm. Yeah. If you could have a magic wand, what do you think the ideal landscape for specifically writers and readers would be?
I Well, to be totally transparent, you sent me some of these questions ahead of time, and so I thought a lot about this one. I still don't have I still don't really have an answer. But I feel like I have to say, I have a Libra stellium, including my son is in Libra, so I'm gonna give a very Libran answer, which is my dream world for the creator consumer relationship would be more balanced.
Mm.
There would be more, there would be supportive dialogue. There would be more, to use the Cal Newport phrase, deep work.
Mm.
I don't, I'm going to date myself. I'm an elder millennial. and I know so many people really revere like the influencer, but part of me yearns for, even though it's gone, the glory days of media before social media,
Mm.
and when you could afford to take at a newspaper, for example, and some newspapers still do this, but like 3 months to work on a story. That
Mm.
doesn't exist for a lot of us anymore.
Yeah.
I yearn for being able to go within my writing hut, and it's not actually a hut, but just, my desk, and really working hard on something that I feel really good about, and not
Mm.
feeling beholden to cranking something out because I said I would publish something every, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Yeah.
So I think room for deeper work, institutions and organizations that support that kind of work for writers, so
Mhm.
that the solopreneur isn't the only option for doing that kind of work.
Mm. Mhm.
Media outlets need to create environments that are healthy for writers and photographers and opinion writers, and let them do passion projects and not just feed the beast, feed the algorithm,
Yeah.
feed the click views,
Mhm.
the page views, and and then for readers to really engage.
Mm.
I mean, this is really sad, but because I worked at an online newspaper, I could see how long people spent on my stories. And sometimes it'd be stories I really did kind of work on, on my own time and was proud of. And like the average time on page is like 30 seconds. And
Mm.
so that's really disheartening. So
Yeah.
to maybe challenge readers to not only support writers and creators, but to through dollars, but support through their attention, and
Mm.
really like when sit down and actually read something, and then maybe leave a thoughtful comment. Or something that I really like to do
Mm.
is when I read something or watch something that I'm like, wow, that was great.
Yeah.
I look at the byline and I send them an email and I say, hey, I just want to let you know, I really appreciated that story. Or even if it's something short, I really like that turn of phrase. I can tell
Mm.
you had a lot of fun writing that.
Mhm.
Thank you for brightening my day. I think
Mm.
we're just so used to absorbing, that we forget that there's real people creating all
Yeah.
the things that we are reading. So
Right.
I don't know. That was like a lot of thoughts thrown at the wall, but that's kind of a little bit of an answer to your question.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's really um something that a lot of creators face, which is and I'm certainly as a consumer a part of the problem too, because so often I would be maybe signed up to someone's Patreon, or some signed up to someone's newsletter and just really enjoyed it. But um, my mindset is often like I don't have time to respond to the person, and
Mhm.
it's interesting having a podcast myself, how much that feedback um, can mean to us,
Sure.
to the creator. Yeah, because it can sometimes feel like screaming into the void.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I will say, like, I'm currently not employed by choice, but at my last job, which I was at for 8 years, writing daily, I saved every reader email, every positive
Mm.
reader email, and they
Wow.
always made my day. And it wasn't often,
Yeah.
maybe once every couple weeks or once every couple months or whatever, but it always just lit me up when I would hear
Mm.
from people or give me ideas, or oh, that really resonated in a way that's not just metrics driven, like,
Yeah.
oh, 100,000 people
Yeah.
clicked that link. Well,
Yeah.
what does that even mean? Did they
Yeah.
read it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's no great answer. And I think, I mean, not, I don't want to sound glass half empty because that's
Mm.
not who I am. I think being in this mushy early stages of evolution of the next chapter of information and media,
Mm-hmm.
uh, can be exciting. I think a lot of us are frustrated because we had to go through so much change, and a lot of ugly stuff came up with the birth of this new era. But I think that if people are like open minded and really dedicated to serving creativity and connection
Mm.
and community,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of community, I think that some really cool things that maybe it wouldn't even be on our radar right now might come out of it going forward. So
Yeah.
I might yearn for the old days, but I'm also kind of interested and excited to see what's next.
Mm. Thank you, Emily. I feel like this conversation has been so nourishing to me, and I've really enjoyed hearing your perspective on all of this. I'm curious to hear you speak about, I don't know, any offerings or anything, any ways that people can follow your work, or yeah, maybe where is the wind taking Emily these days?
I am not sure. And I'm very excited to see what's next for myself, even.
Yeah.
I am in, not to sound too precious, but I am in a season of letting the field lay fallow for a little bit and
Mm,
on a self-made sabbatical, which
mm,
was long overdue,
yeah.
due to burnout, due
Yeah.
to some of the things we have talked about in this
Mhm.
conversation. I have intentionally not been writing for a little while, but I'm starting to feel the itch again, which is very exciting for me.
Mhm.
So I would say people can, probably the best place people can follow me is on Instagram.
Mm.
I do have my Instagram set to private, but if they follow me, I will accept. It's mostly just to keep the spam bots down. And my handle there is Emily is outside. And I am excited to say that I'm currently finishing up training to be a yoga nidra facilitator,
Mm.
because one thing that's coming up for me right now is I'm very interested in, related to everything we just talked about, very interested in anti-hustle culture
Mm.
and in
Mhm.
finding sustainable ways to support ourselves and to create a richer toolbox for staying grounded and nourished in creative life and
Yeah.
living, so that we're not constantly being depleted.
Mm.
And so people can follow me on Instagram and stay tuned for that. But I'm hoping to launch a YouTube and some online classes soon. And yeah, I'm also an astrologer, but not currently doing readings. So, but who knows? Just a lot of little things out there in the ether. We'll see what comes together this fall. I'm excited
Yeah.
to see.
I'm so excited. And if you ever feel like updating, um, and if you want to share any of your offerings in the future, just let me know and I'll update the show notes. So,
Oh, thank you so much.
you
I
know, if
appreciate
folks are
that.
listening to this like 2 years from now, they can maybe find that version of Emily. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Maybe I'll find that version of Emily because I truly don't know.
Thank you, Emily. This has been
Ah,
so incredible.
thanks, Jonathan. I so appreciate it.
Mhm.